Good evening and welcome to the public forum on the proposed fiscal year 26 budget and override requests, April 14th, 2025 at the Flint Public Library. My name is Justin Saltzback. I'm the town administrator for the town of Middleton. Real quickly, I would like to also thank Jackie Bresnahan, our assistant town administrator, and Sarah Wood, our finance director, as well as all of our department heads for their efforts throughout the annual budget process. So turning the page, we have some important dates of note. The annual town meeting, of course, is coming up on Tuesday, May 13th at 7 o'clock p.m. at the Howe Manning Elementary School. The annual town election will occur Tuesday, May 20th from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. at the Fuller Meadow School. Just to give people a high-level view of the town budget process, I know that it all kind of comes together really quickly, typically in late March, about this time, April. There's a lot of effort and thought that goes into this process early on. Starting in September, October, November, we begin our forecasting and preparation with the finance team. December, department heads submit their requests just before the holidays. When we get back in January, we go through those one by one, department by department, and review those requests. In February and in March, the budget is presented, deliberated by the select board and finance committee, and updates are made as education, insurance, and other cost drivers are finalized. February and March are typically tough times of year just because of the big budget drivers are still kind of up in the air. So a lot of those have since settled. April, the annual town meeting warrant and budget are finalized. The finalized document is up on the website, I believe, as of today, and will be hitting people's mailboxes shortly in hard copy form. The annual town meeting, as we referenced, is upcoming in May, as well as the election, and then the fiscal year for fiscal 26 begins on July 1st. A small rundown on the municipal budgeting process. By law, towns must pass a balanced budget. It's not like you see with the federal government where you can have large deficits. We have to hold ourselves a little bit accountable here. So a town department cannot exceed its budget, including the schools, and must use reserve funds or transfer from other line items that are in the surplus to try to cover any deficits, depending on what's going on in your budget in any given year. The only exception to that rule, of course, is the snow and ice budget. Ultimately, the town cannot end the year in a deficit. Town meeting has the authority to make appropriations based on the estimated taxes and revenues of the town, and town election has the authority to override Prop 2.5 to approve for more spending than state law provides for. So that's kind of the rough framework that we work within every year in terms of the rules of the road. So for the fiscal 2026 operating override, what is Proposition 2.5? And I know a lot of folks in the room are familiar, but we are also recording this evening. So for the benefit of the folks at home, it was a state law that was enacted in 1980. It makes it so that towns have to restrict what they can take in from taxes to their specific levy limit, and they can't go beyond that in the next fiscal year beyond 2.5% plus growth. Growth being whatever new development occurs within your community in any given year. An override is a vote to increase that amount of property tax revenue in excess of the levy. So citizens are voluntarily taking it upon themselves to say, yes, you have permission to go beyond that 2.5 at this specific stated amount. Prop 2.5, while oftentimes applauded, has its limitations, particularly for those of us that try to balance a budget. And so we have a graph here on the screen, just trying to give people a good idea of what that 2.5 means over time to our budgets, with the issue being the inflation rate isn't held to 2.5%. And so if we're trying to provide the same services, but you're kind of competing against inflation, over time you're going to get a divide for the exact same services. And so if you're looking at the blue line there, that's the actual budget over the past 6 years within Proposition 2.5. And then the red line is the projected budget based on actual federal inflation numbers that we pulled from the feds. So we're trying to give these same services with a lot less money year over year over year. You can get by for a year or two, but after a while, you just can't do it anymore. And so the only option that you really have are to make a cut to services or to go for an override. So by example, what we're offering in terms of services would be about $1.4 million more today if we base it on federal inflation rates rather than 2.5%. So we have to make that up somewhere.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
What's the federal inflation rate?
It varies year over year.
Okay, all right, just
Yeah.
curious.
So at one point, if you can scoot back one, within that data set, that big jump, it was 8%, I believe,
Okay.
but typically it floats around 2.5, a little bit over. But even if it's a hair over 2.5%, it compounds over time.
Yeah, no, thank you very much.
You're welcome. So breakdown of the fiscal 26 requests. There are 3 in total in Middleton. The first one on this list is a public safety override. It comes in police and fire, and the total cost of $975,000. That would have an impact on an average home in Middleton of about $289. An average home in Middleton at this point in time is about $962,000. Excuse me. Middleton Elementary Schools also has an override in the amount of $537,000, which would be a $154 impact roughly. Masconomet Regional School District has an override as well, the third being $467,000. It would be about a $135 impact. In total being a $578 impact for an average family home in Middleton. So this evening, we're going to break down those 3 items. We actually are very well attended tonight, so thank you for everybody that came out. Very well represented between the town, the elementary school, and Masco. And so to kick things off, we have up at the table with us this evening Chief Doug Lacoste, our fire chief, and Chief William Sampson, our police chief. And we're just going to run through that $975,000 request. So we're experiencing some ongoing challenges budgetarily. It's not unique to Middleton. It's happening to a lot of communities throughout the Commonwealth and nationally for that matter. For us, this is the second year that we've had this request relative to public safety. It has been an ongoing issue for several years. Last year it was widely supported at the annual town meeting, but unfortunately ended up coming up short at the ballot. So additional public safety staff is needed for us to maintain levels of services for the current call volume. And in the past, we've utilized call firefighters and reserve police officers to try to fill in gaps in our staffing capacity. That's one of the big issues that is driving this. So it's no longer an option for several reasons. Among them, the training requirements have changed. So I think you've seen a big shift, particularly in policing over the past 5 years. Which, additional training or changes in training isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it has unintended consequences, among them having access and availability to reserve officers. It's a dwindling group. The residency of town employees has changed. So if you look historically, 20, 25 years ago, almost 100% of our public safety team, or the fire department in particular, resided in Middleton. They were Middleton residents, and so if there was an issue, they could just hop right in and take care of that. That's no longer the case anymore. Chief, is it about 18%?
16%.
16% presently live in town. That's partly driven by increased housing costs. So an unintended consequence of that, values are increasing to a rate where it's difficult for people to live in the town in which they work. And so because of that, we can no longer rely on a robust roster of part-time members for coverage, which is an unfortunate reality. Breaking down the fiscal 26 override request for public safety, on the firefighter paramedic side of things, there is a request for 4 additional employees at the amount of $585,000. That includes salaries, insurance benefits, equipment, training, and certifications, as well as 3 additional full-time police officers, which comes out to about $390,000 also for salaries, insurance benefits, equipment, training, and certifications. There was a question at one point in time throughout this process, why 4 for fire and only 3 for police, and it's just because relative to the existing size of the departments, the police department is a little bit larger right now, so we're playing catch up on the fire department side. And from here, Chief, I think I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, perfect. So good evening, everybody.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Doug LaCoste. I'm the fire chief at Middleton Fire. And tonight we're going to talk about a couple of things, a couple of challenges that we're faced with and why we're asking for firefighter paramedics. What worked well in years past, unfortunately, no longer works for us. And one of the things is difficulty filling shifts. We have a total, our shift strength goal is 5 members on a shift, 3 full-time members, 2 part-time members. And really with relying on the part-time staff to fill these shifts, it's been extremely difficult over the years. We're trying to fill 2 24-hour shifts per day, or about 336 hours per week, and we're having a hard time achieving that goal. A couple of reasons why that's happened is the makeup of the part-time department, or the call department, has changed over the years. As Justin mentioned previously, about 100% of our staff lived in Middleton in years past, and now only 16%, myself included, live in Middleton. We've had trouble over the years getting part-time people to come in and do this job because of the training requirements, and so we've relied now on full-time firefighters that work elsewhere. So if somebody works full-time for North Reading Fire, they come and they work here part-time. It's good and it's bad. It's good because we get somebody who's trained and knows the job. It's bad because Middleton Fire will never be their priority. They'll go to where they can, where they can make overtime. They may not want to work a Friday or Saturday night at Middleton Fire because they have to work next Friday or Saturday at their full-time job. They may not want to work Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve at Middleton Fire this year because guess what? Next year they have to work Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve at their full-time job. So the makeup of the department has changed dramatically over the years. The other challenge that we're faced with, and this to me is a bigger challenge, is callback participation. So what callback means is, for years we've relied heavily on off-duty personnel. So if 100% of the staff lived in Middleton and they're out working in their yard and the pager goes off for help, they hop in their car, they drive to the fire station, they staff the second, third, or fourth piece of apparatus. Well, now the majority of the staff live 2, 3, 4, 5 towns away. So their ability to hop in the car and drive to the fire station at a moment's notice, it's gone. So it gets complicated when we have only 3 people on duty, for instance, and we can't rely on the off-duty staff to come in to help out. So the 2 come together and it becomes a big problem for us. So these 2 issues by far are the biggest challenges that we're faced over the years, and that's why we're asking for help. Risk of increased burnout. So when we have people that routinely work a lot of overtime and they continuously try to fill the shifts and answer the calls, it's a higher likelihood that they're going to get burnt out. And obviously we want to try to avoid that for obvious reasons. For staffing needs for the fire department, so typical call, run-of-the-mill call, we need typically 4 to 5 members to answer the call. Obviously, if the severity of the call increases, like a significant motor vehicle accident, house fire, structure fire, whatever, we're going to need upwards of 15, 20, maybe even more personnel. Realistically, we're going to rely on mutual aid resources, so neighboring communities are going to send resources to help us. But we realistically shouldn't be relying on mutual aid resources on a regular basis. Last year, we had just under 200 incidents where we had to rely on mutual aid resources. So if your typical response time for a Middleton unit was, let's say, 3, 4, maybe 5 minutes for the ambulance, for instance, to get to a scene, when we rely on mutual aid resources, that time is doubled. In fact, we mapped it out, we did the numbers, and the average response time for an out-of-town mutual aid fire truck or ambulance was about 9 minutes and 30 seconds. So the problem is that if there's nobody at the fire station, if there's only 3 people on duty and there's a second call, and we rely on those mutual aid resources to come in, you're going to be waiting longer for those resources to come in. So that in itself is a pretty significant problem. As mentioned, ideal shift strength is 5 members, 3 full-time members, and 2 part-time members. So if we have trouble filling those 2 part-time shifts, oftentimes we'll rely on full-time staff to fill one of those positions at overtime. Like I said, if there's a lot of overtime, people get burnt out. If we can't fill those 2 part-time shifts, we roll with only 3 people on duty. And what happens is if we transport to the hospital, for instance, we try to backfill those 2 positions. So for instance, if the ambulance transports to the hospital with 2 members, we try to backfill with 2 members so that there's, we fill 1 for 1. The problem is that if people are burnt out, if they don't want to come in, or if they don't live close by, a lot of times we have maybe 1 or no people at the fire station when that ambulance transports to the hospital. So that certainly is a concern.
Chief? Question, Chief.
Yes.
Is there an industry standard, like response time, that you're supposed to maintain for emergency calls?
So our goal is usually under 4 minutes, which you have to meet like 4 minutes, like 90% of the time, which we do a pretty good job when we have staffing in town. It's when we have to rely on outside resources that, obviously, that number.
And is that based on things like, what is it, cardiac arrest? You need to start CPR within a few minutes, or a house fire kind of becomes fully engulfed in a few minutes?
I would say, yeah.
Okay.
So, next slide. So you can see here, this is a breakdown of our shift strength. So roughly 41% of the time we had 5 members on duty, and the remaining shifts, roughly 59% of the times we had either 4 or 3 or even sometimes 2 on duty. We typically don't go below 3 members. If we're below 3 members, then we have to hold a member to stay, so it ensures we have at least 3 people on duty. But you can see only 41% of the times we had 5 members on duty. And you combine this with the fact that if we don't have callback participation, this just makes things even more difficult for us to answer the call. The next slide shows callback participation. So what happens is when the ambulance transport's out of town, or if there's a fire call, we page back people to come in and fill the additional apparatus. You can see in 2024, there were just over 1,300 requests for callback participation, of which 600 went unanswered. So we called back for 2 people, nobody responded. We called back for, anybody and everybody, nobody came back. This happened 600 times, about 44% of the times. And you can see that the average callback per member is a little over 3.5%. So it's just the makeup of the department has changed, and it's just, whether it's people just value their off time more, or people are burnt out, or people are just busier lives, we're just not getting the callback participation, which, like I said, worked fantastic for a number of years. It just no longer works. This one here talks about the weekend shift. So as I mentioned previously, we have, if somebody's working next Friday at their full-time fire job, they may not want to work this Friday at Middleton Fire. So you can see here, Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays, 65% of the shifts on Fridays, 76% on Saturday, 71% on Sunday, where there were less than 5 members on duty. So a majority of our weekend shifts are not being filled to its full potential because we're just having a hard time filling these shifts. Next slide. This is a pretty significant one in my opinion. So this talks about simultaneous emergency calls. So what a simultaneous emergency call is let's say the ambulance is occupied with a patient, they're transporting to the hospital, a second call comes in. As you know, we have 2 ambulances in the fire station. There were 404 simultaneous calls last year. So the first apparatus was tied up on a call, second or third call comes in. We rely on either the people in the station or the people that come in from home to staff those vehicles. When they're not coming back, when we only have 3 people on duty, that second or third call is not getting answered by Middleton personnel. So we need to rely on those mutual aid resources, and as I mentioned previously, a 9.5 minute response time for those mutual aid resources delays the care that the people deserve. Next slide. So what would hiring 4 additional firefighters accomplish? It would increase the full-time staffing base from 3 to 4 members, with hopefully 5 if we have part-time participation. It would allow for more consistent staffing, less reliance on part-time staffing, and less need to fill part-time staffing with overtime, and also decreased need for shift holdovers. What this won't do, if we're successful with the 4 members, is unfortunately, it's not going to address the ongoing problems with callback participation. I can tell you that probably the last 5 or 6 full-time hires have been from people who live outside of Middleton. Years ago, when I got on the fire department, when Chief Martinek, Chief Twist, when we got on the fire department as a part-time member, it was our goal to be a full-time firefighter. We lived in town, we wanted to be a full-time firefighter. That's just not the case anymore because, like I said earlier, a lot of our part-time firefighters work elsewhere for fire departments, so they have no desire to be a full-time firefighter. So, so what's gonna happen is if we hire these, if we're successful with these positions, we're still gonna have problems with our callback participation. And what's the solution to that problem? That's gonna take some more time and more thought to really figure out, how we're gonna tackle that problem. But at least if we get 4 full-time firefighters, it will help to strengthen our foundation of members that are in-house and ready to respond if needed. Okay.
Chief,
Yep.
what about the fact that you have to service the jail? How does that affect the numbers that you talked about?
So the jail is, so roughly 17% of our transport. So what happens is when somebody calls for an ambulance, usually 1 or 2 items occur. Either they're transported to the hospital or we get what's called a patient refusal. Of the patients that are transported, roughly 17% of our hospital transports involve somebody from the jail. Between fire and EMS, it's about 7% of our overall run volume, call volume. I can tell you, I know there's been talk amongst, people in town, can we stop going to the jail can we stop responding to the jail? Long story short, we looked into it and we cannot stop. The only solution to the problem is for the jail to hire a private ambulance company to physically be on site at all times to answer those emergency calls. And I can tell you that that is never gonna happen. It's not worthwhile for an ambulance company to invest time and resources for a relatively low call volume. So because the jail is in our community, we are obligated to answer those calls.
But wouldn't it not help if you were to get those additional 4 full-timers to lower that 17%?
Obviously having the more staff would help to ensure that there's people in the station to answer the calls.
So are people not in jeopardy when you have an ambulance up at the jail and you need it?
There's always a roll of the dice. They could be at a doctor's office, they could be at, the DoubleTree Hotel, they could be anywhere doing a call, and you just run that risk of having that second or third call, and, just hopefully we get the resources to staff that second ambulance or that fire truck. We talk a lot about the ambulance, but there's also the risk of fire emergencies too. That is a realistic threat, unfortunately. Anybody else?
Are you increasing from 3 to 4, or are you hiring?
So right now, we're looking to hire 4, so what happens is so 3 is our minimum, so we have 3 full-time members and 2 part-time members. So the bare minimums right now is 3 full-time members on a shift. If we get an additional 4 firefighters, that would increase the base to 4 full-time firefighters.
I understand.
With hopefully 5 if we get part-time participation.
Thanks for clarifying.
No problem. Anybody else? Thank you.
Well, good evening. My name is Bill Sampson. I'm the police chief here in Middleton. Again, thanks for everybody coming out tonight. It's a great turnout. We appreciate all your support. One of the biggest problems we're having in the policing side is, not that it's a problem, but it's just a change, is the state has changed the training requirements for police officers. We used to have reserve officers went through a reserve academy, which was basically 150 hours, and then full-timers went through the full-time academy, which is 6 months and then 3 months of field training. When the post system came in, they are basically phasing out part-timers. So what you have is a situation where if you want to be a police officer, you have to go to the full-time police academy, even if you're going to be a part-time officer. So when Middleton has historically relied on part-time officers, we would have at one time half the department was full-time, half the department was part-time, so they would augment the shifts. If a full-timer took it off, if a full-timer went to training, if a full-timer called in sick, if a full-timer had something else to do, then the part-timers would work in their place, and we had a plethora of part-timers. Since the training, that, I think we had 11, we're down to 3, and the ability for them to work is slim. So what we did was we dropped almost half of our staff without replacing that staff. So what we've been looking to do is replace that with full-time police. And we're at 17, and that's what we were prior to this, before they changed the training. So this 3 more full-timers would bring us to 20, which is on the low side of where we should be. You know, the national average is the formula is basically 1.5 officers for every 10,000. We should be, per the national average, at 20 to 25 full-time police officers. This 3 would get us to 20, and you know, we're trying to stay ahead of the curve, because if we were to advertise for a police officer, we would hold interviews. You get the applications come back, we hold interviews. When we decide who we're gonna hire, then we have to send them to the next police academy. That's a 6-month turnaround before they finish the academy. Then they come out, and it's a 3-month field training officer program that they have to go through before they're a solo officer. So you're looking at almost a year from when we advertise to when we get that person on the road. So that's why we're behind the 8 ball right now, that we're only at 17. We've asked for this a couple of years, trying to stay ahead of that, but you know, for the reasons that are realistic, we haven't gotten that. That's why we're back again to say we really are looking to add that 3 additional officers to get to that position. You know, in policing, when we look at, you know, policing in general, it's a proactive sport per se. Police are expected to be out there seeking out, deterring criminal behavior, deterring violations, and out there actively seeking people that are committing crimes. When you get down to minimum staffing, which we would ideally have 4 to 5 on each shift, we're recently down to 2 on a shift, and that's because we had 4 that were out injured and 1 that retired. So we had the 5 down officers, so we're at 2. You know, when you look at actively going out, and when we're having problems, areas of speeding in this area, and we want to assign somebody down there to just do speed enforcement. If somebody walks in to file a complaint, or you know, they're a victim of a crime, then you have to pull that officer. So you can't dedicate anybody to a certain task during the shift. Accidents come in, calls come in, alarms come in, and it just pulls them in every direction. Then if you have an arrest, we have to call in an officer to assist, so then you have to bring somebody in for overtime. So we're basically at the bare minimum of where we can actively respond to calls, try and do some proactive work, but it's difficult when you're at minimum staffing. You know, the resources, we can do a lot. This agency now is a full-service agency. What I mean by that is we have patrol function, we have an investigative function. So if you're the victim of a crime that takes follow-up, your house is broken into, your car's broken into, you're the victim of a fraud, of a scam, we can now respond to that, take the initial call, pass it off to a detective, who now can take the time to do a competent and thorough investigation between crime scene, follow-up, interviews, interrogations, and actually put people in jail. So without the resources, we're limited to just a patrol function, which is not what, you know, the amount of money that this agency pays to this, you know, for the policing, you should have a full-service police department. So that's why we're trying to get the numbers where we can actually do that. If you look at just the state and national average, we're at 64% per capita, the statewide average for departments. We're 68 for the national average, and we're 80% for similar size. So we're clearly way under where we should be. And again, like I said, 1.5, as we increase in size, if we do get additional units, if we do get additional people moving in, this is a growing community, to catch up with that, it takes a year to get the officer on full-time. And then we have retirements coming up. So it's tough to, when you're right at that level, to try and stay ahead of the curve. So as far as why I kind of explained being a proactive agency, being out there, being able to handle every needs that come in, we just need the personnel. And if you can see on the slide, comparatively to the agencies around us, or the towns around us, we're below all of them as well. So we've run into that quandary between the new training standards, the national people applying for police has come down. You know, at one time, we would have a slew of people that wanted to be part-time, would hire them as a part-timer, and the nice thing about the part-timers, we kind of look at as like a baseball team. That's your farm system. You bring them in, you train them in a minimal amount of training, you bring them out, you see how they are as police, you see if they fit in with the community, you see if they're good cops, and as they prove themselves that way, as full-time positions come open, we kind of move them up into that full-time role. Now, without that part-time, you know, that bench that we had, we have to hire people as full-time. You send them, you put a lot of money, a lot of training into them, and then we hope that they work out. So it's a little different strategy on how we're now hiring and recruiting and retaining police. So our big change, unlike the fire, is because of the system and the training requirements that have been put upon us. Does anybody have any questions with that?
Yep. If the override does go through, how will the police force act towards the school systems? Will they start stopping by again? Because I heard multiple different opinions about police not coming to the school systems.
Well, we have a school resource officer, but the problem is because that person is also the patrol officer for the day, one of the things we want is to expand that, to be able to put a full-time school resource officer, because we have 2 schools in town and Masco. It's definitely needed. I've met with the superintendent, it's definitely welcomed, and to dedicate someone just to that is one of the goals of adding that additional police officer.
Any other questions for Chief Sampson? All right, thank you, Chief. Chief? So in conclusion, this override has been multiple years in the making. I hope, as you can see, we laid out here with our team, this is a data-driven request. It is undisputably a need. And I think some of the concerns we have pertaining to response time, but also for me as a manager of a staff, concerns about burning out our employees that we do have that really work very hard to serve the people of Middleton is a huge concern for me as well. Broadly, does anybody have any questions? One last chance for me or the chiefs relative to this override.
If I could just explain, Chief Sampson, when over like 2 in the morning, you know, someone coming through town, accident, find out they're under the influence of something, an arrest is made, and you have 2 people on. Just, I know you've kind of touched on it, but again, the stress that puts on the staffing, and God forbid something comes in from
Right.
in-town.
So when you have an arrest, you have to have 2 people on that arrest, you know, through the booking process, just for safety for the person and for us. That leaves the town uncovered. So what we have to do is we have to call somebody in or order somebody in. And that's nice, but as the Chief of Coast was saying, not everybody lives in town. Matter of fact, most don't live in town. So when you make that phone call, the person now has to get dressed, make their way in, and be able to handle calls. So what happens in certain circumstances, like you have a DUI, it's a different circumstances, that's an arrest that's going to be made. But if you have someone that has a suspended license, you may opt to just give them a criminal summons to show up in court later, rather than making the physical arrest, because you just don't have the people to process it. And while it doesn't seem like a big deal, when you make a suspended license and you bring them back to the station, you could find out that it's another person in the warrant out of state. They're a wanted person. They're doing other things in town other than just driving around with a suspended license. They're actually looking to break into houses. It takes that option off of our, that takes it off the table, because we just don't have the personnel to process them while still covering the town. And he says 2 people to process. You call in one, you have an accident that requires 2 to 3 officers. Now you're going to call in more staff. So it's just the resources are stretched thin. The more we have, the more we can do. Those complaints of the school, why isn't, end of the day, there's nobody down there doing traffic. We would love to assign somebody every day to be there for that. Just don't have the resources to dedicate them. Even if we send them down there, on their way, an alarm call comes off at a store, they're breaking off, they're gonna clear that alarm, and they're gone for a half hour, 45 minutes. And that time we need them is already passed.
Is there a cost savings with hiring these 3 and 4 additional people compared to what we're paying in overtime at the moment?
Yes, when you have the adequate resources on, if somebody takes the night off and you can't fill it, if we have 4 on and we can run with 3, then you don't have to pay that overtime. If there's only 2 people scheduled, every time someone takes a day off, you have to fill it with overtime. And one of the things with overtime is when we have overtime budgets, they're also used not just to cover empty shifts or half shifts. We can use it to do DUI patrols, we can use it to do enforcement patrols, we can do it, a lot of different things you can use that overtime, which is, in my opinion, it's more beneficial, it's more, you use it in a better way than just putting people in a seat to cover a shift. But absolutely, when you have more people on, you have more resources, you can do less with, if we lose one person, we can kind of absorb that rather than right now we lose another person. Every shift that person has done overtime.
Just to add to that, Chief, for some context though, it's not a true 1-for-1, so it's not as if we're picking up one person and then offsetting the cost entirely on the other side.
Right.
If I could just add, unfortunately, the problems that we're talking about, they're not gonna go away. They're only gonna get worse. I mentioned 16% of my staff live in town, myself included. I worry about 5, 10, 15 years from now, when I retire, when my command staff retires, there's a high probability that those people aren't gonna live in Middleton. So that 16% is gonna get lower and lower and lower, and that's gonna make the callback system that much more difficult to achieve, so.
Yeah, the average house is saying 900,000, cops not living in that house.
All right, so if there aren't any further questions, I think we're gonna take a quick minute or two to reset and then shift over to the elementary school.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We have with us Superintendent Scott Morrison and the Chair of the Elementary School Committee, Michelle Aiken. So I'm gonna hand it over to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all being here tonight. You can move to the next slide, Jackie. So I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces here and people that are aware of the elementary schools in town, but for those watching at home, just want to reinforce, why are we doing this? And it is to nurture and realize a dynamic learning environment where creative thinkers and innovative problem solvers develop empathy, resilience, perseverance, self-management, and kindness needed to positively impact the world. And how do we do that? We do it in 3 different ways: to ignite, inspire, and engage. We have innovative teaching practices that cultivate creativity. We inspire through social-emotional learning by developing and strengthening students' self-management, social awareness, self-efficacy, and a growth mindset to be successful. We also engage in inclusive practices. We recognize, respect, and welcome the individuality of students and staff and embrace new ideas and creative thinking. So just to run you through sort of the Middleton elementary school budget, the budget is really our financial plan that supports the educational programs and initiatives approved by the school committee. This financial plan consists of the personnel costs, so the teachers, the staff, educational supplies and equipment, professional development, special education, support services, and facilities. Now, the revenue that comes into that budget comes from a few different ways. Local appropriation, which would be the tax dollars, state and federal grants, and also revolving funds. So just to take you back, last year at this time, there was an override for the schools, and this was to enhance our offering. We wanted to add more instructional intervention. We wanted to enhance our specialist programming. We wanted to add a classroom section and also increase the student support personnel. As you remember, this override did not pass. It did at town meeting, did not pass on the ballot, and it was not included in our budget in the override for this year. The community made us aware that it wasn't really a priority. So moving on to this year, we're in a much different situation where we've had some increased costs. Those are coming from out of district special education, increased costs in health insurance, and also the overall increased costs in running the 2 buildings. So to offer level service, and what I mean by level service is we're not adding anything new to our budget. Everything that the students are getting this year and last year are what we're asking in this override for next year. We did make some adjustments to get this number down a little bit, and really that was sort of based on enrollment, especially when it comes to the reduction of the one classroom teacher. The enrollment kind of goes in waves. We saw, a downshift, and, it made sense for that section to be removed. There was an audit to the salaries of the staff. We were able to save some money with a retirement. We're putting off some technology updates, and we're also recommending that the Finance Committee adds an additional $133,000 from our special ed stabilization fund. Now, all that being said, if the override does not pass, we will not be able to offer level service to the kids from pre-K to 6. So this list here over in orange is what would be cut if the override failed. So it would be 3 classroom teachers, 1.7 FTE of special ed teachers, a reading teacher, the instrumental music program, which a lot of you know as band, a reduction in our offering for an assistant principal at Hal Manning, adjustments to administrative salaries, instructional aides, and really overall consumables. So, we are asking for this override because we want to keep the Middleton elementary schools as best they can be. My 2 kids had an awesome experience. I see a lot of parents in here that I think they had a really good experience too, and we want to keep them, the reason why young families move to this town. I will take any questions. Was there anything you wanted to add?
No, I think you hit it all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Overall consumables, is that
Those are supplies and materials, consumable materials that the kids use.
supplies?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does cutting 3 additional classroom sections do for class sizes?
Yeah, so it will increase the class sizes, obviously, but I would say that you're probably looking about an average of 20 per classroom. It could be higher in some grades, it could be lower in some other grades. I think we're at an average of like 17 to 18 right now, but again, it's still higher in some grades and lower in others. One of the things that a lot of parents, or myself included, have liked is the smaller classrooms. I should add that we get forecasting for births in town, and we kind of base our enrollment projections on births, and we are seeing an upswing in the next few years for the enrollment to increase. I don't want to be here in 2 to 3 years asking for another override because enrollment went way up.
The .3 assistant principals, the assistant principal right now a .3, or would you be reducing?
He's a .1.
Okay.
Or, yeah,
1.0.
1.0, sorry,
Okay.
yeah.
Hi,
Yep.
the 133,000 special education stabilization, can you explain what that means for special ed? Is that you're
Yep.
transferring funds from?
So how long ago was that stabilization fund created?
About 5 years ago.
5 years ago, okay. And it was created because we know that we have kind of a fluctuating number of out-of-district special education tuition that we are responsible for paying for. And we basically built this account, or it's kind of a saving fund for when we're in peak years to kind of level the cost.
Yeah.
Am I saying that
Yeah,
correctly?
just try to keep things as even as possible over the years. It's a great financial tool for a district to have. I think as the community knows, I also serve as a superintendent in Boxford and Topsfield, and it's something that we've talked to all 3 towns about. And Middleton has really led the way with this in terms of a stabilization fund and a reserve account as it relates to special education. The other 2 towns, we have actually asked to come over and talk to our colleagues in Middleton about how to set this up, because it does help stabilize exactly what it means, stabilize special ed costs. And in years where costs are a little bit higher, the stabilization fund can be accessed. In years when costs are a little bit lower, we look to fund that account.
and it's not the cost, it's the impact to the taxpayers.
Thank you very
that
much.
It tries to be leveled off, because
Yep.
none of us have any control over the actual spent cost, but through using this stabilization fund, the impact to the taxpayer can be more evenly spread over
Thank
the
you, Darcy,
years.
for that.
Is the main use currently for out-of-district placement, or is it also for in-town special education, teachers or therapists or anything like that?
Town used it for out of district as well.
It helps augment the budget with non-tax dollars. So how the budget, so it can be used for how the budget, what the budget is for, but it only comes into play in years when there is a spike in sped costs.
What I'm getting at is, in theory, then it won't have any effect on current special education sort of services that are being provided to students.
That is well. Those will all stay the same. But if the override doesn't pass, as you can see, there'd be 2 special education teachers reduced.
Yeah.
But with everything being equal, your answer is yes.
Yep.
The positions you're talking about eliminating, are these all existing positions, so you're talking layoffs? Or are these positions you're planning for that you're removing from the
No,
budget?
they're existing positions.
So this would, if it fails, you look at 7 layoffs. Ish, yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Could you just explain a little bit about how losing the instrumental music program could put some of our students at a disadvantage moving on to Masco?
Yeah,
compared to
it
Boxford
definitely
and
would. So my daughter's in 6th grade right now. I just registered her for 7th grade at Masco, and one of the questions in the registration process was to pick her elective, and one of them could have been band, and it said, she doesn't play an instrument right now, but it said you must have, I think it's a minimum of 1 year instrumental music experience to join the band. So if this offering was cut from Middleton, the students from Middleton going into Masco would be at a disadvantage because the students at Boxford and Topsfield would have that experience with instrumental music. So they wouldn't be, unless they were in private lessons, which we know not everybody can afford, they wouldn't be able to join the band at Masco. I did get the question earlier about the school play, if that would be cut, and it would not. That's a separate stipend.
So that line item, instrumental music, there would be no band training?
That's correct, yes.
Wow.
Okay. All right. My email is on the Tri-Town website if any of you have questions or, yeah, just let me know. Thank you.
All right, thank you to our partners from the elementary school for joining us. We're once again going to do a quick 1 or 2 minute reset to let Masco get settled in up here. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Matt Alexander. I'm joining you from the Masco School Committee. I'm here with Lisa, Kendra, and Trevor, my colleagues. So, I think a lot of what Michelle said is going to also resonate from what I have to say. And this is not a Middleton problem. This is a statewide problem, potentially a national problem. School districts across the state are hurting right now. The state has not stepped up to help us. And I'll start by just saying that we've already engaged with our state representatives. They were at our meeting the other night. We've begun to have discussions with them about ways that they're going to increase the help that they give us. But the situation that we're in right now is really, really difficult. We recognize that. And we've done what we can so far this year to mitigate that. We're doing what we can for next year to continue to mitigate that, and the state has also been engaged to try to help some more. So I'm going to walk through what our budget looks like, what our override looks like, and then we'll take some questions. So when we started this process, every year, we more or less start with a level of service budget, which, as Michelle was mentioning, is basically the same services that they were providing the year before. If we started with when we started with a level service budget, it was equivalent to a 9.6% increase over last year. And I'm going to break that down for you in a couple minutes. That's 3.19 million of an increase across the 3 towns. We spent 2 months as a school committee with the administration going through line by line of the budget, looking for opportunities to cut down what we could. We made some really hard decisions. There were tears during our school committee meetings trying to figure out how to mitigate these costs. And we settled on a budget that brings the override down to $467K. Okay, I'm gonna show you what we ended up doing, but there were some really hard decisions, and there is gonna be impact to our students. So the overall budget decrease across the 3 towns went down $833K, which reduced our assessment by $240K to $467. Sure. So I do want to show you what the picture looks like across the 3 towns, and this can be a bit of a overwhelming data dump, but just to point it out, this FY26 column is what we're looking at for this year. And then you've got Middleton, and today we're only talking about the operating assessment, but you can see compared to Boxford and Topsfield, we're actually in an advantageous position this year because of the regional agreement. You can see that their increase in Boxford is 7.2%, Topsfield is 11.3%, ours is 4.2%. And the way the regional agreement is written, the vast majority of that agreement states that based on a 5-year rolling enrollment number, that's how you get your assessments. So it just so happens, again, this year is a good year for us, believe it or not, at only 4.2%. If you look at, again, Topsfield, 890K increase, Topsfield's looking at 1.1 million. So ours at 467K is, it's difficult. It's much less difficult than what our partner towns are looking at. The other way to look at this is if we ante up the 467K, our Middleton students will benefit from $2.4 million worth of services. Okay. So that's how I read this. Next chart. So I'm not going to go through all the details of every piece of the increases, but what I will say on the left-hand side, you see that $2.7 million of the $3.1 million of increases can be categorized into those buckets. And much like the elementary district, a lot of it is due to out-of-district placement and transportation. A lot of it is due to health insurance, dental insurance, and these are things that we don't get to control. If you look on the right-hand side, again, all these different categories, other than salaries, are things we don't control. So we went after the things that we could control. And if you look at the next chart, that's what we did. These were the difficult decisions that we made. We laid off 7 staff. So I'll give you a second to digest this list. We laid off 7 staff. We have a retirement that we are not replacing next year in the world language department. Right, so week after week, I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Lois Afro. I actually teach at Masco. I'm retiring, and my retirement's not up there. So are they going to replace me?
I apologize, I'm not sure which position.
Yes, we do plan on filling the math.
I have an idea that you don't have to replace me, and you can save over $100,000. We have.
When we were looking at the team structure, that didn't make sense, and at all those meetings, we did talk about your position pretty openly. We didn't tie your name to it, of course, but it wasn't. We weren't at a point where we wanted to start affecting the team structure.
It wouldn't.
Well, if we'd be pulling someone from another department in the high school, and you
Still wouldn't. Want to hear my idea?
I think you would. Thank you for offering that.
So I'd maybe like to hear your idea offline, right? I think that we looked at a lot of different options. We worked with the administration. We hear the feedback during our school committee meetings for 2 months straight. Educator after educator after educator gets up, shares their ideas with us. I mean, we went through months of processing these ideas. I apologize if I haven't heard yours directly, but I'd like to hear it offline if you want to stick around after.
Okay.
So the other thing that we did was there are a couple line items on here that do hit Middleton families directly, right? High school families directly, and those are the increase in parking fees down the bottom, as well as the increase in sport and co-curricular activities fees, right? So we felt like while trying to preserve a lot of the services that we do provide the students, we also had to turn up the knob a little bit in terms of putting the burden back on the families, just a little bit. So this adds up to $833K of reductions. Again, our part was $100K that came off our bill. Next chart. And so, I think that we're optimistic that this is going to pass. We put a lot of thought, a lot of energy into this. To be honest, if it doesn't pass, it will be catastrophic for Masco. We're looking at likely up to 20 additional layoffs that we would have to make, and that would just crush Masco. And so how do we get there, right? We get there by passing the budget. And the way that we pass the budget, right, if it does fail in Middleton, but it passes in the other 2 towns, the regional agreement states that we still fund it, right? So we may not be, your taxes may not be going up, but we're gonna be drawing that money from other departments in Middleton.
Can you explain that a little more? How does that, like, what do you draw from?
Justin might be able to, or stuff.
And I can ask later, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
Sure. So, so real quickly, so there's several different, I'm sorry, which one of you was asking? Hi there.
Hi.
So there are several different scenarios that play out here because you're dealing with 3 communities all in one district. And so one of the scenarios out of many would be if it passed in Topsfield and it passed in Boxer but failed in Middleton, Middleton would still be on the hook for that portion. So it actually wouldn't go straight to cuts to the town budget. I mean, more directly, it would go to probably another select board's discretion, but another special town meeting with an opportunity to try to fund Masco again. Ultimately, if we fail to fund Masco in this scenario that is extraordinarily unlikely, it could result in the town having to make that money up out of the town side budget. So, police, fire, library. We don't think that's likely to occur. We try to prepare for all scenarios. At the end of the day, it would be at the select board's discretion. But I can tell you in terms of the municipal side budget, we've cut that to the bone. We went back and did another $150K in cuts to balance the budget for this year, and that includes giving back a police cruiser because in the police chief's own words, he'd rather have another police officer than a new car. So there's really nowhere for us to dip into. I would say to Middleton's benefit, Topsfield votes a week or 2 weeks, a week in advance of Middleton. And so I'm not advocating one way or another, but you could very well be in a situation where you find out that Topsfield already voted it down. I think it limits or mitigates some of the risk for the Middleton voter. It could be that Middleton or the Topsfield passes it, and then Middleton and Boxford are voting pretty much at the same time in different places, and then it's a little bit more of a risk. So,
Thanks, Justin. So I don't have too much more to say. I'll only just close by offering, again, $467K override gets our students $2.4 million in services, and it prevents a prospective cut of up to $1.6 million. Any other questions? Yeah.
When you went through what you would need to cut, was it sort of based on the thinking of what the voter would tolerate in terms of the price of the override to the average family?
I think, and I'll speak for myself, I won't speak for the other 10 members of the school committee, right? The way that I thought about it was through 2 lenses. One was certainly, what could be tolerated in the towns, whether it's an override or just dollars and cents in general, right? I mean, I think that we're looking at this from a perspective of, we know the financial situation, we understand the financial situation, we're trying to do everything we can to minimize the cost. I think the other perspective that people took that I took was that, Masco is a educational institute that people come to the Tri-Town for, and we need to make sure that we provide our students with the services that the Tri-Town families expect. So it wasn't cut at all ends to get down to $0. It was cut as much as we can, unfortunately, and still provide the students with a top-level education. So I know that's not a
No, that-
black and white answer. I'm sure others maybe thought of it a little bit differently, but that's how I thought about it. Yeah.
I don't know if you've thought too much about this, but if you had to make those 20 to 25 cuts, do you know how many you think, ballparking would be teachers versus support staff?
So we can't really get into that. We don't right now. The way that we think about this is, it would be the decision of a future school committee to make those decisions, right? Because it would fail, if it were to fail now, if it were to fail at the town hall or at election, by the time the school committee deliberates on what the impact would be, it would be a new school committee, and a current school committee can't commit a future one. So we didn't even offer up really a detailed list, but we did estimate based on the dollar amount, that it would be about 20 heads. So,
How many teachers are there at Masco?
153. 153.
No, give or take, it's 150.
Right there.
Now that includes, to be fair, that includes nurses and et cetera, but staff in the
Total staff.
membership, correct. Teaching membership is 153.
I was actually also looking for some clarification as to what exactly would be cut if the override didn't pass. The elementary school committee gave us a pretty good list, so I was interested in something like that from Masco.
Yeah, unfortunately, our position has been that we can't offer something like that. Would be committing a future school committee.
This is just one town, and you need to take the other two towns into consideration as well. Everybody has a position on what they want to keep and what they would like, what they're okay letting go. There's 11 members, so we were not comfortable saying what the other two towns would be comfortable cutting.
So when you say 20 to 25 teachers, where does that come from then?
I mean, largely looking at where our staffing comes from, it's largely teachers, and our salary costs goes largely to teachers. So most likely it would largely come out of that pot of staff that we have, unfortunately, but just looking at the numbers, most of those would likely be teachers, but again, trying to keep, we have a policy about class sizes, and so trying to keep within that within that policy becomes very challenging when we're looking at these 20 to 25 staff cuts. So, but it would largely come out of classroom teachers, I believe.
So you think more faculty as opposed to programs?
It could. I mean, we've been floating a lot of conversations about next year, because next year also looks like a challenging year for us. Like we offer Chinese, and Chinese isn't the most popular, well-enrolled class throughout the school. Is that a program we consider eliminating? But it takes a couple of years to actually eliminate a program like that. So we're in the discussions about that and trying to start that conversation a little earlier next year, so we're not getting this landed on our laps and having to react. We can be a little proactive about some of these decisions we unfortunately have had to make.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm formulating my thoughts as I'm speaking, so I apologize. But the way that they calculate the 3 different towns, does everyone foresee Masco, thank you, Middleton having to pay more next year or the following year?
Yes.
Because I think enrollment is going up, is that correct?
Yes, well, the balance of enrollment is going up.
Right, so I guess my question now is, if we are in this position next year after losing 20, 25 heads, Middleton will be affected more, is that correct? Because our percentage will be higher next year?
I mean, I think.
Does that make sense? I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. If
Is that correct? Okay.
understanding
Right,
correctly.
because your staff to student ratio.
Right.
But I think independent of what we do this year, next year, our assessment is gonna go up. Right, so you can kind of
Kind of sounds like
synthesize
every year we're
what
gonna be in
this
this
mean-
position.
What this year might mean, but no matter what, next year, our assessment is likely to go up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Well, thank you everybody for your time.
And as a reminder, the annual town meeting warrant is now up on the website for the upcoming May 13th, 2025 annual town meeting at 7 o'clock PM. So put it in your calendar and we hope to see you there. Thank you.